Greetings and welcome to the Unknown Webcast. By way of reminder, I am so conservative that I have trouble turning left even when I'm driving. This is broadcast number 30 for those who are keeping track. And our friend Dr. Richard Howe is joining us on this edition of the Unknown Webcast. Tonight we're going to talk about a Christian perspective on the occult. My name is Don Vino and I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of tonight's webcast. And here's Ronnie. Well, maybe here's Ronnie.
Apparently, I can't turn my mic on and have the share screen on at the same time. I just found that out. So, okay, well, greetings from hot, sticky, sunny Florida, except now the sun is down. Our sponsors tonight include the Coexist Boutique, for when you care enough to take your hands off your loved ones' throats long enough to pick out the perfect gift, and the Bible Buffet. It is not your father's worship experience, the Bible Buffet. Back to you guys.
All right. You know, over the years, I have seen different fads in occultism, let's say. In the Christian market, in the secular world, Mike Warnke used to be very popular amongst evangelicals as the authority on Satanism, for example. Johanna Michelson in her book with The Beautiful Side of Evil, which I later discover is suspect at best. In 1993, I had the opportunity to go to the Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago. It was the second time that Parliament had been held in 100 years. And I and about 11 or 12 other evangelicals, we weren't invited, we just sort of crashed their party. And we had a great time, and we spent, I spent most of my time probably with the Wiccans. And spent maybe 2 hours with the PR guy for the Covenant of the Goddess. Donald Frew is his name. And he really was complaining about the misrepresentations by Christians of Wicca and paganism, and even of Satanism. And he tried to help us understand that a little more clearly. So I thought, in light of our getting closer to the Halloween season, when everyone can freak out about the demonic activity in our world, we would have Dr. Howe on tonight to talk about really 4 aspects of occultism. And Dr. Howe, maybe you want to... Pardon?
Don, did that guy, that pagan guy, did he have a business card that said "People Against Goodness and Normalcy"? With a kind of a goat head in it?
No, he didn't. But I have to tell you what was kind of funny. He said he had not grown up in church. He had no really experience with the church. His experience, he said, with Christians has not been good because it has been mostly by public misrepresentation from the source like Mike Warnke and those who have kind of shaped their worldview about Satanism from Mike Warnke. So, Richard, why don't you give us a little bit of your background again? Who are you, and why do you look like Anton LaVey?
That was, of course, the first thing I did when I started into the occult. I just instantly went bald.
Who's Anton LaVey? I have no idea.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned Donald Frew, because I wrote a cover article for a Christian Research Journal some years ago on witchcraft in America today, and I interviewed him via email twice, once for the cover story and then a follow-up story on evangelism to Wiccans. The interesting thing about that article was, as a CRI journal does, some issues after an article has run, then they invite they have letters to the editor. So they had sent me, and presumably Donald, but at least me as the author, a couple of letters that they were going to print. One was favorable and the other was critical. Well, the critical article was by a Christian who thought I didn't know anything of what I was talking about. The favorable letter, rather, was by Donald Frew. So I thought, this is really going to endear me to the Christian community. The Christian hates what I had to say, and the witch loves what I have to say. So how much credibility does that give me with everybody when it comes to this subject? My background, my formal studies are in philosophy, as you know, from Ole Miss and from University of Arkansas. But outside of my formal studies in philosophy, probably the area that I've spent more time researching has been the occult. It started as a foray into New Age beliefs. And when I was a student at Dallas Seminary, we had a speaker come and try to raise the specter of the New Age movement. This was the early 80s, and very few Christians, I think, were on board knowing the dangers of it. And because, you know, at that time it was infiltrating things like business philosophies and self-help philosophies and things like that, this sort of occult view of reality. And
even medicine, it was infiltrating medicine.
Even medicine, absolutely. Yeah, I had a radio dialogue / debate with Bernie Siegel, who wrote Love, Medicine, and Miracles, and Between Doctor Visits, and several other books on New Age medicine. But studying the New Age required me to go back to the sort of primary sources of occult philosophy. So I ended up getting, over the years, everything from the Satanic Bible to Creflo Dollar and everything in between that imbibes this, whatever it is, this occult view of reality.
Okay. Now, you have listed on your website. Why don't you give your website address as well?
Yes, richardghowe.com, richardghowe.com. So if you click on the resource tab at the top, and you can look at all different kinds of resources, PDF decks, papers, links, multimedia, different kinds of things on a variety of subjects related to philosophy and apologetics, including stuff on and New Age movement and things like that.
Okay. So on there you have 4 forms of occultism listed. Yes. What are they?
Well, basically they run a spectrum from how hardcore or undiluted occult philosophy they are. So when I teach on this, after I do a little bit of introductory remarks, then the 4 areas basically are what I call extreme occultism, then a moderate occultism, which would be witchcraft and Wicca, neo-paganism, and then mainstream occultism, which is New Age, and then Christian, with the word Christian in scare quotes, Christian occultism in the Word of Faith movement. They're basically progressively more subtle installations of this same false view of reality that characterizes the occult.
Okay. How do people react when they hear that Christians are included in the occult, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, of course, that's deliberate on my part. I'm deliberately trying to be provocative. But what I think a lot of people would be surprised to discover is that, at least in some of the writers in the Word of Faith movement, people like William de Ortega, for example, or even Benny Hinn in his more unguarded moments, the fact that the Word of Faith movement utilizes principles and ideas from the occult, that's not the controversial part. That's what they admit. William de Ortega, in his book, Quenching the Spirit, admits that God, in fact, he says it this way, that God used the witch's brew of the New Thought movement and he put witch's brew in quotations, God used the witch's brew of the New Thought movement, which is basically a late 19th century occult renaissance, kind of like the New Age movement of the latter 20th century. God used the witch's brew of the New Thought movement to reintroduce into the church truths that had been lost for centuries. He even talks about occult powers, and he says, this is almost a direct quote, that these powers are not only for witches, with the word only in italics. So the implication is that the power that he's celebrating in his book, Quenching the Spirit, is the same force or power that the witches use. Presumably he's going to use it for good. So it's like Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker. It's the same force, but it depends on how you use it as to whether it's good or evil, which is very characteristic of an occult view of reality.
So when I talk to these guys, is it okay to say to them, if anyone here has telekinesis, please raise my hand?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, please raise my hand if you. Well, it's interesting because I have an audio clip of Benny Hinn, who's talking to Paul and Jan Crouch on the Trinity Broadcasting Network, and Benny was startled, if not excited, to discover that the doctrine of the power of the spoken word that he preaches is exactly what they preach in witchcraft. And he's explaining to them, and they're like, "Oh yeah, these witches, they understand these secrets.
Yeah.
They get this stuff." And he's like, "Yeah, this is." And again, the idea is of course, they're going to use it for evil. They're going to curse people in Benny's mind, but I'm going to use it for healing and these things. But it's the same kind of force or power behind it all, which is an occult view of reality.
It is. I some years ago I was doing a radio interview, and we were talking about Wicca at the time. And as we're going to a break, I said, there isn't a lot of difference between Wicca and word faith teachers. And the interviewer was shocked when I said that. They said, okay, we're going to have to pick this up right after the break. And then during the break, he said, you better say something really good and really fast. I said, not a problem. We came back, and he said, okay, you made this statement. What do you mean? I said, well, think about it. Wicca basically views the world as we control nature by the spoken word. We cast spells that cause the universe to conform to our will, and we do that by spell and incantation. What does the word faith movement teach? That they, by spoken word and incantation, cause the world to conform to their will. You speak money into existence. You can speak a car into existence. Whatever it is that you want, you speak the word, and the universe must provide it for you.
Has anyone ever spoken the cure for the common cold into existence?
Yeah, you wonder why they just don't go ahead and just speak it all and get it over with, and we could just move on if that's the way it works.
Yeah. All right. So before we get too much into picking on the Christian occultism, let's start at the top. Extreme occultism. Explain what that is, so that we have so at least we're talking about a common language, let's say.
Yeah, well, there are a few basic concepts and elements of their view of the world that all of these occult groups have in common. For example, things like all of reality operates according to these cause and effect laws. And so just as in natural sciences, you can control the physical world by learning the laws that govern physical reality, how to boil water or how to refine this metal or whatever, and you apply those laws and you can manipulate physical reality. To take that same template and say, well, that's true of the spirit realm, where it operates according to laws, and so you just have to learn the, quote, recipes of how to manipulate the spirit realm to get, again, physical results like healing or curses. So this idea that laws govern everything in reality is throughout all of them, whether it's the most extreme form of Satanism to the most subtle, sanitized sounding form in the Word of Faith movement. So the idea of this laws that govern reality is the basis, is a basic concept in the occult.
Sounds like Bill Gothard
and
might
Ron,
be in the occult by that definition.
No, you guys would be in a much better position to judge on that than I would. You're the Gothard experts here. So, but you also have this notion of a force. Every occult group that I'm familiar with has some kind of understanding that there is a sort of an immaterial force that you can manipulate and learn how to harness in order to hurt or help or others. Now, what this force is, according to these different groups, and what's the best way to tap into that force, that's what makes the difference between these various groups. So a Wiccan will have a different view as to exactly what is this force. It might be some kind of nature force that you can draw down the moon. A Satanist, typically like Anton LaVey, thinks it's a force that is more or less generated by bioenergies like adrenaline or fear or lust, and that sort of generates this energy, and you can transmit it out according to your will if you follow these rituals. Some of these occult groups will regard this force even as personal beings, like angels, or gods, or departed ancestors. Some of them will even try to give it a more technological sounding. So they'll be UFOs or extraterrestrials or some kind of brain wave, and they'll make it sound physiological and make it sound relatively innocuous and stuff. So you've got the laws, you've got the force that characterize all of this, and then how to manipulate these things. Difference. Now, when it comes to Satanism, typically Satanists are just like Wiccans in the sense that they recognize there's a force, and they recognize there are these laws, and they recognize that human beings have the prerogative of sort of tapping into it. But typically Satanists regard reality anywhere from being totally indifferent to your well-being as a human to maybe outright malevolent towards your well-being as a human. Wiccans tend to regard reality as anywhere from indifferent to maybe benevolent towards you as a human being. So Satanists tend to be more self-centered, self-aggrandizement, fulfillment of your lusts, get ahead of others, survival of the fittest kind of way. Whereas Wiccans tend to be more community-oriented. Let's all, get together and hug and love one another, and let's recycle and, solar energy, whatever it is that they care about.
Sounds like the difference between the good witch of the north and the wicked witch of the west,
Yes, exactly. Yeah. In fact, a Satanist like Anton LaVey would regard witches as more or less just gutless Satanists. He doesn't think there's really any reason to worry too much about your fellow man, especially if they don't deserve it. So he tended to be a little bit more malevolently disposed towards other people if it served his interest. Whereas Wiccans default to a more beneficent kind of worldview, I think.
Okay, now it seems to me he and Michael Aquino, who was a Temple of Set,
Yes.
and some other of the big names of a bygone era, were really more humanists. I mean, they called themselves Satanists, but they didn't believe in a personal being named Satan.
That's actually another thing that I found people are very surprised to hear when they first start learning about the occult. For LaVey, at least, he was a straightforward atheist, with the exception that he did think there was this magic force that you could manipulate through various states of mind, which would separate him from, say, a materialist humanist. But you're right, he didn't believe that Satan was an actual sentient being. He just chose that as a metaphor in his rejection of the standards and philosophy of the Christian church. So since the Christian church, in LaVey's mind, historically would stand against things like fulfilling your desires of lust and self-aggrandizement and revenge, he said, well, I'm going to embrace those things. I'm going to celebrate these things, and so I'll just choose your bad villain as my and I'll be a Satanist. But he didn't believe in a sentient being. Now, Aquino, though, did believe. That was one of the philosophical rifts, if you could imagine a sort of a Protestant Reformation going on in Satanism, so to speak, where there's a breakaway group from the main mother church, because Aquino actually claims that this being who has gone by the name of Satan in Hebrew mythology actually appeared to him one evening and called him to separate himself. Maybe it sounds more like Joseph Smith, I don't know. Separate himself from Anton LaVey and start the new era. And so since Satan has already been pretty much co-opted, you can't have like reformed Satanism. That's probably not going to have a nice ring
Satanism,
to it.
I like that.
Sounds
Yeah,
like Orthodox.
the Church of Latter-day Satanists or something like that.
Or Orthodox Satanists, and then you've got the liberal Satanists. I don't know.
Exactly. So he had to pick a different mythology. So Set is, not to overdo the similarities, but Set is roughly equivalent in Egyptian mythology to how a lot of people might think Satan was in Hebrew mythology. He's sort of the bad guy, the Prometheus, the guy who's rebelling against the gods and striking out on his own and being his own person, captain of his own fate. That kind of mentality. So he chooses Set. Yeah, but he does believe that Set is a sentient being. He does think Set is responsible for inculcating into human beings in our distant evolutionary past, this sort of sense of individualism and rationality that sets us apart from, say, animals that only operate by instinct. And so that idea of being separate from the rest of the world, against which you can become an actor and manipulate, is in the Temple of Set. And they think that he thought LaVey just got off track selling priesthoods, and he thought it was a cop-out. It's an interesting thing to read on the internet, because they don't like each other at all. The Setians and the Satanists do not have any affection for each other at all.
Okay, yeah, they don't have affect. So it's like Michael Aquino would be sort of the Martin Luther of Satanism, where LaVey would sort of be the papal figure of Satanism.
He'd be the Peter, I guess. I don't know. The Pope. We don't want to overdraw the joke, because it actually would be misleading. But yeah, you're right. I mean, Satanism was started in the late '60s by LaVey. Now, it also turns out that a lot of the things that were the standard story about his name being Anton Szandor LaVey, and he was born of this heritage, and these were his parents, and this is how he got into. Most of that story has been debunked. It's just not being true. I mean, his name's not even Anton Szandor LaVey. That's not even his birth name. Sort of like Hitler's birth name. If he went by Adolf Schicklgruber, it would be pretty hard to not get Snickers from all the SS when they're trying to do a Heil Schicklgruber. It just doesn't have that zing to it like a Heil Hitler might. So Howard Stanton LaVey just doesn't have that satanic feel that Anton Szandor LaVey went on to have. Another thing, too, not to throw too many things out at once, but lest I forget, it also turns out that large portions of the Satanic Bible are directly plagiarized from a book titled Might is Right, which was written in the early 20th century by a pseudonymous writer named Ragnar Redbeard. And Might is Right, historians are not sure who wrote it, and they're not sure whether the writer meant what he was saying, or possibly was writing a sort of an expose of what he thought would be the logical consequences of social Darwinism. So Might is Right is just this misanthropic rant it's also anti-Semitic, and it's just spews out all this venom against humanity, and just grab all you can, get ahead of everybody, step on anybody you need to, that kind of philosophy. So what I do in my class on the subject, when I teach on the occult, is I actually have the viewers can go to my website, richardghowe.com, and go to the resources tab, and then click on the PDFs option. Scroll down and get the PDF deck, and you can see this for yourself. I put in parallel fashion on the slides every place in the Satanic Bible where it's ripped right out of Might is Right, and it is verbatim with one exception. The occasional anti-Semitisms are expunged in the Satanic Bible. Now, I don't know why, but I found it very interesting that as rebellious and as bad as Anton LaVey saw himself to be, he couldn't bring himself to be overtly anti-Semitic, even in the Satanic Bible. Though the Might is Right was explicitly Nazi and anti-Semitic in that regard.
Okay, so now while we're kind of in this category, I want to bring it over to a Christian, the way Christians understood Satanism, say in the 1970s, and represented it to their congregations. In my opinion, they were hoodwinked through the writing primarily of Mike Warnke with his book Satan Seller. You may or may not be aware of this, but it actually influenced the whole psychology community, because of his book and the way he described the Satanism and how it operates. You started having claims of satanic ritual abuse and so forth that people had repressed. This goes now into the 80s and 90s. But all of that is a direct result of Mike Warnke's claims about Satanism. Now, how accurate is his representation of how Satanism operated?
Virtually nothing, I think, that Warnke had to say about the subject was true, including Warnke's own story about himself as having been a Satanist, and all this. All of that was exposed in a book called "Selling Satan: The Tragic Story of Mike Warnke." John Trott, and I forget who the co-author was. That's up in your neck of the woods, I think, Don, where this.
Yeah, they were with Japuza.
Yeah, out of Japuza. Yeah, and so his idea that Satanists had infiltrated all of these Christian organizations and churches and all kinds of elements of society, and there were this vast satanic conspiracy, that there were breeders who were having children to be sacrificial lambs, so to speak, in satanic rituals. All of that stuff was exposed as fraudulent, and we lost a lot of credibility because people like Michael Aquino, for example, was implicated. Though he was never indicted, he was actually implicated in some of these ritual child abuse accusations, and we just lost a lot of credibility as a Christian community. And now it's retroactively or retrospectively now referred to as the age of satanic panic. I think you might have used that expression earlier, and I regret that because there is enough to criticize about the philosophy and the worldview that Satanism is. There's enough there to launch a legitimate criticism of without having to pour on top of it false accusations of criminal activity. That's not to say there isn't any criminal activity that has been done by Satanists, but those tend to be more your self-styled, like Richard Ramirez or David Berkowitz or others who were more or less self-styled. They weren't part of Anton LaVey's Church of Satan in California, and are probably not having anything to do with Aquino's Temple of Set either.
Right, and so you can't really then look at them as representative because they kind of are anomalies to that view anyway. I mean,
absolutely, and you could also pick instances of atrocities done by pseudo-Christians in the name of Christianity.
Right.
Where people are fanatics and they're psychos, they're criminally insane or whatever, or demonically possessed, whatever the explanation is. They might do it in the name of a group, but that by itself is not enough to implicate the group. And so Satanism tends to be, and you can understand why, they tend to be pretty explicit that, hey, when we talk about things like human sacrifice, those are just metaphors. We're not asking people to go out and actually hurt other people. Well, of course they wouldn't do that because you'd be put in prison, and then where's all your grabbing all the gusto going to go when you're sitting in prison?
Yeah.
Even though there are the Berkowitzes and there are the Richard Ramirez's and the serial killers who claim to do these things in the name of Satan, you don't have to do those criminal activities to still be false in your view of reality and anti-Christ in your view of reality.
Right. Now, we are going to go, we need to take just a short little break before we move on to the next group. And so Ron has a word from one of our sponsors, hopefully queued up.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know what? We all have been there in this day and age when you're socializing with so many different kinds of people in your neighborhood and on your block and all that. The same questions just keep popping up. Do you struggle with finding the right wine to bring to pagan goat sacrifices? Do you wonder what to wear to your neighbor's neo-Nazi parties? Do you get anxiety attacks when trying to find the right picket sign to share with your friends from Westboro Baptist Church? Well, now you can put an end to all the worries that come from trying to fit in with people on opposing sides of the culture wars by shopping at the Coexist Boutique, where you can find the perfect gift for any ideology. The Coexist Boutique, where you care enough to take your hands off your loved ones' throats long enough to pick out the perfect gift. Back to you guys. And I hear they're having a sale this week.
A sale this week at the Coexist
so you
Boutique.
Want everything 50% off. So.
Well, looks like Richard is busy doing something, occupying not Wall Street, but occupying something. We need to get a Coexist Boutique label and just paste it across Richard's head. I think that would be good.
I'm not sure about
All right. Back to Richard on Christian perspective on the occult. Let's move on to the next one, moderate occultism, he calls it. And it would be Wicca or witchcraft. Just by the way, when I was at the Parliament of World Religions again this last October, gosh, it's almost a year ago now, in Salt Lake City. It was this year. Anyway, it was pretty recent. And one of the booths that I was at was for Circle Sanctuary, and they are not too far from us up here, about 2 hours away. It is the oldest 501c3 Wiccan group. And so as I was talking with the lady behind the table about Wicca and what they do at Circle Sanctuary, they have just recently they were licensed to do natural burials, so you don't have to have a casket. I said, are you like ground conservative? You can just do a sort of a 2-inch round hole and drop us in head first or something? And she didn't seem to find humor in that, but so you can kind of just become one with the earth again. And I asked her, I said, where I am really conservative, and she visibly drew back. I mean, I said,
see the powers that your words have, Don.
I know that spoken
cause
word,
and effect.
Yeah,
the
exactly.
Spell, the incantation.
And I said, would it be possible, because it seems like you all run tours and that sort of thing, that I could bring a group of people I know up there to kind of just talk and see what it is that you do and get a better feel for it? And she said, oh no, I don't think that would be, you couldn't do that. And I said, well, why would that be? She goes, well, you always try to evangelize us. I said, okay, well, let me understand this, just so I get this from your perspective. Isn't evangelism simply trying to persuade someone to adopt your worldview, whatever that is? And she said, well, I suppose. And I said, I noticed that you have a booth here at the Parliament of World Religions. So I am guessing that you are trying to persuade people to, if not embrace, at least acknowledge the validity of your worldview. And she said, yes. I said, so wouldn't that be evangelism as we have both now defined it? And she said, oh, I guess you could come up.
Hey, so, Dr. Howe, you got your microphone back on. I see. Okay.
Okay. So, Dr. Howe, tell us about Wicca/witchcraft.
Well, the interesting thing about this Parliament of the World Religions is that over the course of, I think, I don't know how many meetings they've had now since I've been following. I think they've had 2 or 3 in the past 20 years.
Almost 5 now. And now they're going to be having them every other year.
Well, what I find startling about this phenomenon is that pretty early on, when people like Donald Frew or whomever else might have shown up as a PR guy, as you characterize it, for Wicca, at that time, Wicca would have more or less been characterized by world religion experts as a new religious movement, and largely a late 19th, early 20th century phenomenon in Europe and then also the U.S. Because it's not true that it has this unbroken tether back to the Salem witch trials and then back to ancient antiquity. Though it picks up some of the themes and motifs, modern witchcraft has a fairly recent sociological history. But because of the PR work they've been doing and their presence at the Parliament of the World's Religions, I tell my students that witchcraft or Wicca is, I think, on the cusp of being recognized as just one more world religion.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever that might carry with it as far as perks and benefits. For example, it might then start showing up more often in standard academic college textbooks on world religions when you're dealing with Buddhism and Hinduism and Islam and Christianity and Judaism and the others. All of a sudden now Wicca is going to start showing up. I think if it does do that, it'll be largely because they've been able to garner such an audience over these Parliament of the World Religions meetings and carved out a niche as being part of the landscape of you'll never see something like that, I think, happen to a Satanist, where they actually are going to schmooze with the other up there, and they go, oh yeah, come on, you know, they're always going to be sort of marginalized and by their own design, I think. So I think it's a serious thing, because it gives it a credibility in some people's minds that accidentally carry along with it the fact that maybe there's something to this that's beneficial and worth considering as a human being. I regret that, in the sense that people would actually begin to give them the benefit of the doubt simply because they've been able to carve out a place at the table now of the world's religions. You were talking earlier about your presence there, Don. The evangelicals are conspicuous by their absence, I think. It should say something to people. Go, well, why is it when representatives from all the world's religions find it so easy to overlook the differences they have with other religions, except us? We're the only ones that they aren't comfortable with us being in the conversation.
So,
other things.
What, is Islam represented at the parliament?
Yes,
I think so. Yes. Uh-huh.
And
in fact, the guy who he's been president, he just stepped down. Someone else came up. Is a Muslim himself, and so they had a fairly good representation. No jihadists, though.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. You know, it's like there seem to be different shades and stripes of Muslims, and some of them would not want to have any dialogue about and put the differences aside or any of that.
That's right. And he could have been Sufi, for example, which would find themselves a lot more sympathetic to other. And he could have been some Shiite Muslims are a little bit more open to to dialogue than this.
I have a story to share, because this may be helpful when you're talking about two things. One is you just raised the idea of Christians aren't there. I think there's a number of reasons for that, and we were there because we see it as a mission field where people are open into talking about spiritual things. I think it's a perfect place to go. It is kind of our Mars Hill experience. But at the first one in 1993, it was here in Chicago. It's a Drake Hotel, and sponsoring organizations had their own suite. The Islamic community had one, and Joy and I went up there to talk with the Muslims, because we really wanted to know this question: how is it that as a Muslim you could be at an event like this? The Wiccans had really captured the imaginations of the Parliament, especially the Fellowship of ISIS, because they had the best costumes, and wherever you saw the female ISIS members moving from place to place, you had this whole trail of men following them. And so there was kind of a battle between Fellowship of ISIS and the Covenant of the Goddess, because ISIS was the smaller group of getting the most attention, so the Covenant of the Goddess went out, and they were doing the drawing down the moon ceremony and trying and get themselves in a newspaper. And yet, as we were sitting talking with the Muslims, my wife Joy, and you know Joy, she's got good questions usually, and so she leans over to the wife of the Muslim contingent and she says, I know why they're here, but why is it that we are here? I mean, we don't believe in Wicca. In fact, as far as I know, Islam holds the same basic view of Wicca that we do. So why are we here? And the woman looked at her and almost started tearing up, and she said, you know, when I first came to this country, I moved to Naperville, Illinois, and we didn't have a mosque for the men to pray. And so I started opening my house on Fridays and moving the furniture and laying out the prayer carpet so the men could come and pray. And then after a few years of doing that, I was going to go home for about a month. And I was really worried, where would the men pray? And my Christian neighbor was concerned about me and knocked on my door and asked if she could prepare my home on Fridays for the men to pray. And I was so touched by that when this opportunity came up, I thought maybe we could truly have peace in the world, because in my country, the Hindus are killing the Muslims. And I thought this might be a way to solve that. So she was willing to look away from Wicca, for example, in an effort to have peace and keep her family safe.
So earlier, Dr. Howe, you were saying that, you know, you have the Wicca world and the Satanist world, neither one of them are being taken very seriously right now. But we could see a day when the Wiccan world is taken seriously. It kind of, I think maybe a good analogy of this is you have the DC comic world and you have the Marvel comic world, okay? And one day, it's like the problem with the DC comic world is they've got Thor, and he's never going to really make much sense to people. But a guy from Krypton makes a lot more sense. So one day people might take the DC comic world really seriously, but the Marvel or the Marvel, I forget which one is which. But
well, you are an optimist, aren't you?
Yeah.
You are an optimist, yeah, with the DC and Marvel coming together.
Right,
I mean, what?
Well, the reason I thought of that is because right now I think almost everybody looks at both Wicca and Satanism is kind of like comic books. I mean, they're not religions; they're more like graphic novels.
Yes. I think that's changing for Wicca. That's what I think has been the effect of their presence at the Parliament of the World Religions. But I think you're right in another respect. Let me finish one sentence before I start another. I think one of Satan's tactics is the first thing I think he tries to do is to get people to believe he doesn't exist. This is something C.S. Lewis talks about in the Screwtape Letters. If he can't get people to not believe he exists, then the next thing he's going to do is either make his works look so silly that people won't be on guard against his deceptions, or make people so afraid of him that they'll be obsessed and do, like Bob Larson today, where you get your degree in exorcism and buy your little cross that you can, in that kind of silly stuff. So the witchcraft stuff, you tell somebody, well, I know somebody that's into witchcraft. I think a lot of people will think, oh, do they wear a pointed hat? They have a wart on their nose, or they ride a broom. They come out every Halloween. And what I regret about the fact that people might react to it as if it's just silly is that a view of reality that is fatal, that is toxic to a person's soul. Not that individual Wiccans that are that way, because as Don was already explaining, a lot of them are beneficently disposed to their fellow human being. They want everybody to get along and coexist and all this kind of stuff. So they're nice people. But I use the illustration with my students. I say, look, if you look at a pile of flour, baking flour, and a pile of ricin, they look very similar. They're both white powders. They both perhaps have a certain solubility in various things like water or alcohol or whatever. So you could probably talk a little bit about how many things they have in common. But ultimately, it's how flour and ricin differ from each other that's the most interesting. Because flour is actually a food and ricin is a deadly poison. So I grant that there are similarities between some of the worldview of Wiccans and maybe some of the worldview of Christians. For example, we want to peacefully coexist with, Paul tells us that. It as much as lies within you, be at peace with all men, Paul says. And that's the way Wiccans tend to be. Wiccans have a heightened sense of environmental concerns. Christians have the same thing. We have it for different reasons. They do it because they think the environment is divine. We do it because we think we're stewards of an environment that's been created by God. But we're still both have a certain sense of environmental conscientiousness, or at least we think we ought to. So I acknowledge the similarities, but I have to press it on with my students. But it's the differences that make all the difference in terms of their view. And probably the most conspicuous difference is, and this is something that are more deliberate about than I've seen among Satanists, and that is Wiccans are adamant that there is nothing wrong with the human race, sin from which we need to be delivered. We don't need a savior. All we need to do is just sort of, put our big boy pants on and work together and make the world aright. So there's no idea of a fallenness. There's no idea of redemption. There's no idea of sin that we need God's help to struggle against in our lives. They're adamant about that fact. That's the thing they don't like about us as Christians, I think.
So then, the main problem with the Holocaust is that the Nazis were wearing their little boy pants. Is that the whole thing?
Or they weren't. They were being babies about their relationship with other nations.
They're just being immature, just being kind of juvenile. They just put a bunch of gas chambers together and said, watch how immature we can be.
Well, now they don't minimize the horrific consequences, but the metaphor is that people of developed character and developed humanity can see the need to peacefully coexist like the coexist bumper sticker. Now, we know that that's just whistling in the dark.
They don't minimize,
because that's not going to work.
Right. They don't minimize the horrific consequences. They minimize the horrific causes.
Absolutely. That's exactly right.
Or the horrific cause, which, of course, is alienation.
In fact, that's right. They deny that cause. So it's like having a disease that they will admit, well, we don't want all these bad consequences, but I don't really have a disease. Well, that's the cause of all this stuff. It's because we're estranged from God. It's because we are corrupt inside and need a savior. That's why there are Nazis, or serial killers, or child abuse, or pick your favorite Holocaust to illustrate the fallenness of human. And I think, Don, going back to your earlier comments about where the Wiccans say, well, they don't like the Christians because you keep trying to evangelize us. It's right on this issue, because unlike Wiccans, we recognize they have something. They lack something they don't have, namely a savior. They don't think they lack anything, and they can't stand it when we keep trying to tell them that they do.
Right. Now, just for those who are not as familiar, I have a couple of slides that might be helpful, because you were talking about, for example, a description of the witch. What does she look like? So I have some things from the Parliament. Let's see if I can get my little share screen to work here. There we go. This might be helpful. If you can see that, everyone see that? Yeah. We have an altar here that we took that at the Parliament of World Religions in 1993. Wicca, The Ancient Way, is one of their books that they like to promote, magical religion and modern witchcraft. And the female you see in the picture there is the founder of the Fellowship of Isis, the late Lady Olivia. And we spent some time talking to her. Interesting character. She's from Ireland, and she and her Episcopalian priest brother started the Fellowship of Isis, which is they claim the oldest religion. It goes all the way back to pre-Egyptian times. So that is Lady Olivia. Pardon?
It's called the Fellowship of Isis. Is that
Fellowship of Isis? In fact, they were at the. Go ahead.
Could it be that the current administration insists on calling the Islamic State ISIL because they don't want to give the Fellowship of Isis a bad name? Is that?
Well, I don't know.
If they regret that name now.
What is kind of interesting about this is that the Parliament this year, when I was there, I was in a couple of their sessions, and one of the sessions they spent a fair amount of time in the beginning complaining about this new upstart group ISIS, who was so evil and doing bad things, and co-opting their name.
Yeah, it's kind of like back in the 70s, we saw those commercials for the AIDS reducing plan, that diet program.
I
wonder why that's not around anymore. I wonder what happened to that. I wonder what the reason that went out of business.
One of the things, see, sometimes it's well-planted questions that are important. I want to come back to that because I want to do, if I can get this to advance one more slide. I can't. Okay, hold on. Let me try to, how do I get out of this? I got to go out of the share probably. No.
Yeah, there's one of your screens says stop sharing somewhere in the bottom there.
Yeah, no, I want to advance this, but I have to bring up, well, here it is. Okay.
I saw a mountain. I've been to the mountain. Okay.
Now we'll get that to share. I guess we can't get to. Anyway, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to close it and go out of that.
Look at that fire hydrant right there in front of the mountain.
Well, they were talking. It was interesting because they were saying how that Wicca is the oldest religion. It predates even Egyptian religions, and that Isis is the daughter of Nut, N-U-T, and I forget the father's name. And as they had talked about that, I was able to raise my hand, and I said, no, it's my understanding that Isis married her brother, and they produced children. So is it the case, and maybe you can help me understand this, that that incest is merely a matter of personal choice and neither right nor wrong?
It makes you wonder how much they regret just the way that things have gone to just ruin these kind of names and these kind of motifs and stuff.
Yeah. Well, and they didn't really know what to do with that, because I guess they probably hadn't really thought about that before. And so they said, well, even in the in the Old Testament, you have incest. And I said, yes, but because it happened, it's described doesn't mean it's prescribed, and it is actually claimed to be morally wrong by the same Old Testament. So then they kind of tried to go on, and I raised my hand again. They came back. I said, do you have a follow-up question? I said, well, really, it's the same question. Is incest, based on your understanding about Osiris and Isis, brother and sister marrying, having children, would incest be neither morally right nor wrong, simply a matter of personal preference? And they stared at me. They didn't really know what to say. And finally they said, we couldn't condone it. Which leads to another question, which my friend Bill Hunsberger likes to pose, and that is, why not burn witches? Because their fundamental view is that there's no absolute truth in Wicca. There is only your view and my view, and they could be completely opposing to each other and still both equally true. And so if we ask them, is it okay to burn witches? Their almost immediate response is, well, no, because of the Wiccan Rede of 3, which is, and harm none, do as you will. And so we think about that, and we go, okay, well, if what you're saying is true, then that may be true for you, but it's not objectively true for me, because the Wiccan Rede of 3 doesn't universally apply, since truth is relative. So wouldn't it really be the case that to beat a witch or burn a witch or take a witch to lunch are simply personal preferences and not morally good or bad in and of themselves?
So explain to me again why it is that this person that you wanted to bring a tour group or to tour there didn't want you there. I'm not really sure why they want you.
I hadn't asked her that question yet.
Oh, she didn't have an excuse then, did she?
So, Dr. Howe, we've covered now, you've mentioned there were 4 kinds of occultism we were going to look at.
The occultism is not different. It's the same as far as the variations on these few basic themes, but it's sort of degree of how subtle it is, perhaps.
Okay. So we covered 2 or 3.
We basically
covered
touched
2 or
on
3.
2 of them.
Right. That's what I thought.
So we did the
third one.
The third one would be New Age, which is basically, it's like what Satanists and Wiccans would hold as far as their view of reality, but now it becomes very mainstream, and in many instances completely loses any kind of religious flavor. So it can take on the guise of self-help programs. It can take on the guise of maybe some cutting-edge science, like, say, right brain, left brain, or getting in touch with your inner counselors. It can even sound almost science fictionist with UFO research and extraterrestrial alien abductions, these kinds of things. So but because of that, or alternative medicines was already been mentioned. That's probably one of the biggest, is various states of altered states of consciousness as that plays into healing states, tapping into, like Bernie Siegel, who is a oncologist, has a spirit guide named Michael that helps him. He actually claims to communicate, Bernie Siegel does, with his dead patients. It's incorporated
dead patients,
medicine.
Do these dead patients have any specific complaints against him? Like he could have.
They could get it prorated.
Could they get a
surgery
refund?
only lasted 5 years. Can I get part of my money back? Maybe that's what they want. Yeah, exactly. So,
can he pursue a class action suit against him?
It's much more mainstream. That's the key to it. So that people, and in fact, even Christians can buy into things like yoga, the contemplative movement, the prayer movement, and these kind of things. And it almost seemed completely compatible with their Christian faith because they don't see it as buying into a false view of reality. But like they would do if somebody said, hey, would you like to come to my Wiccan church? People would probably go, well, no, that sounds kooky. Would you like to come to my satanic meeting? Well, no, I'm afraid of you guys. Well, how about this? Would you like to read Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth? Okay, that might be good. You know, would you like to read
Sure.
Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich? Oh yeah, that might can help me in my sales technique. The point I try to make from it is they're buying into the same false view of reality. That we're all unlimited potential. We're all God in embryos. There's a force out there we can manipulate with our minds, and we can use this force.
Didn't Star Wars really help to advance that cause to more mainstream occultism?
It did. It sort of gave us one more angle in terms of the entertainment industry. In fact, I do a whole presentation based on the book that I co-wrote with Norm Geisler, the revised edition I co-wrote titled The Religion of the Force. And I do a whole multimedia PowerPoint thing, which is a blast to do. I don't know if the audience likes it, but I love doing it because it's full of movie clips where I show the similarities and differences between the religion of the Force and the religion of Jesus Christ. And of course, that difference is going to be occult.
This is why Star Trek will always be superior, because they don't have to resort to some goofy force. You know, they've got the closest they get is Vulcan logic. That's it. Well, the real reason we're here is to talk about Christian occultism. That's why we saved the last 4 minutes for it. So it's the most important. I mean, you know, it struck me as odd when I first heard guys like Benny Hinn and you know, these word faith guys being called occultists, but almost immediately it also seems so appropriate. I mean,
it absolutely is appropriate. And the thing is, depending on how you word it, if you said, hey, Benny, are you into the occult? He's probably going to say no. Well, what do you think about witchcraft? Oh, I hate it. But if you word it in terms of the worldview, then he will say, well, absolutely, I believe that. Benny, do you believe that you can affect reality by the power of the spoken word? He'd say, absolutely. He doesn't realize that by its very essence is an occult view of reality. Do you believe there's a force out there that you can manipulate? Yes, that's occult. Do you believe that we're all gods? Yes, I believe we're all little gods. That's exactly what the Wiccans say, that we're all divine beings. And this is, Benny Hinn says this over and over again. And Marcirillo says these things, and John Avanzini, and a lot of these stalwarts in the Word of Faith movement. So they believe there's a spiritual law. Kenneth Copeland has a book called The Law of Prosperity. They believe that you can manipulate that law by the power of the spoken word. They believe that we are gods in embryo, so to speak. Those are the three most essential ingredients, the sine qua non of occult philosophy. And as I said earlier, when you look at people like William de Ortega's book, who's a Word of Faith theologian, occult, that's not even the controversial part anymore. The controversial part is to whether or not you should or shouldn't be that, not whether it is or isn't that.
By the way, next week, World's End Theology Outlet is going to offer T-shirts that say, "What you say is what you get. Name it and claim it. Say it, don't spray it." That's going to be on
I like
these T-shirts.
Sign me up.
Yeah. I just remembered hearing that. I mean, I heard this 30 years ago, 35. Well, let me think. It was 1980. I was working in a bank in downtown Chicago. And the Christians I was working with, I didn't know the phrase word faith at that time. I think it was just a short time later that I heard it. And they were saying, you know, what you say is what you get. You know, name it and claim it. That's, you know. And so I'm thinking, where do you get this from the Bible? So I had heard the name Morris Cirillo a few years earlier. I didn't know was he already teaching this back in the 70s? How far back does the word faith movement go?
Yes, I don't know if it goes back to the 70s. I would think probably yes. I mean, you have people like John Osteen, who was Joel's father, who wrote a book called A Miracle in Your Mouth, which is again the spoken word, which in witchcraft, the idea that there's a power in what you speak is called a spell or an incantation. Yeah, so you have a miracle in your mouth. All you have to do is say it.
It sounds like a mouthwash commercial with Lavoris. There's a miracle.
I think you might have gotten a free bottle of mouthwash when you bought the book.
You know? Wow. It's minty fresh.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, some of
So I tell you, I first started learning about it in terms of its infiltration into the Christian circles in the very early 80s with Dave Hunt's book, The Seduction of Christianity. And it was interesting because that book was met, not surprisingly, with a lot of anger from the Word of Faith preachers who were being named in there. So I find it telling that the very accusations that they reacted so violently against, but I'm saying just emotionally, so against in the early 80s, they now embrace in the early decade of the 21st century. But the facts are the facts; they haven't changed. It's just it's basically a Christian.
What's really sad to me is, I mean, a lot of people say, well, why are we nitpicking? Why are we picking on these poor Christian brothers and sisters? Can't you just let your differences be put to the side? And isn't this something really insignificant? But the fact is I know people who are caught up in this movement, and part of it, there have been a lot of tragedies that have come out of it. There have been a lot of hurt, I mean, not just hurt, but devastated people. A woman in Indiana who was really into it, and her friend was too, and then her friend comes down with cancer. What are you supposed to do? You're supposed to name it and claim it. You're supposed to speak the disease out of existence. You're supposed to, and the woman tries to do this, and her friend, who's the one I'm talking about actually, tries to do this for her friend, and as the cancer progresses and gets worse and worse and worse, she finds all of these people at church are no longer coming up to her anymore, no longer saying, we're praying for you, or we're speaking the word for you anymore. Her support structure just dissolves under her as her disease gets worse. Only one friend stuck through to the end and was there I'm sure other people probably came and paid their respects, but she was the only one who was really there and really stuck it out to the end. And then her faith was on the rocks. I mean, after she saw what happened to her friend, it wasn't because her friend died. It wasn't because they couldn't speak the disease out of existence.
Absolutely.
It was because of the way she was treated.
Yeah,
it was because
the
of
whole thing was a mirage.
Supposedly,
the fact that they could treat it that way was just a mirage. It was just a lie.
But that wasn't the thing. It was
Exactly.
the way she was ostracized, the way she was virtually cast out of her Christian community because she didn't get cured.
Well, and my first experience with that was I was a volunteer chaplain at a hospital in Glen Ellen, and they brought in a young man, mid 40s, who had died. In fact, he died on his way to the hospital. He died of cancer, which, as it turns out, was highly curable even at that time. And his wife was there, and so I went to talk with her, console her. Her first reaction was, "Get away from me! Your God lied to me." And I wasn't sure how to respond to that because I didn't know the history at that point. Her parents came in and heard her doing that and came to me and said, "You have to understand, he was going to get treatment. It was curable, 99% cure rate. He had gone to a Kenneth Copeland meeting and was told that if he went to treatment, he was claiming the illness. And so he needed to repudiate that and claim his healing. The result is he died." This is dangerous.
And of course, Kenneth Copeland took full responsibility for that, right? And,
Yeah.
And so you could extend the principle beyond the physical body, because they're preaching. The Word of Faith movement is not Christianity. It's not like denominational divisions between Methodists and Baptists and Presbyterians. This is something that bears virtually no resemblance to the historic Christian faith. The God is different. The Jesus is different. The gospel is different. And so however much it is obviously devastating to people in this world, the ultimate tragedy we know is what danger it puts people in for the next world, because it's not leading them to the saving message of Jesus Christ.
If you don't mind, we're going to run a couple of minutes over because I want to do some quick things. One is to hear from our other sponsor. The other is, and Richard, just give you a moment to kind of think about this, in terms of wrap up for tonight, what is it that pastors and elders need to think about, and how can they interact with their congregations to help them better understand these things and to prepare for the culture in which we live, where these are more readily accepted, even in the church? Some years ago, I think it was Peter Jones did a book titled Pagans in the Pews, talking about some of this stuff. So what can churches do to prepare their people both spiritually for the church itself and to reach out to a culture that is buying more into these kinds of things? Ron, we have a word from...
well, we have a word from some friends here who asked some questions. Are you tired of hearing all about the difference between the milk of the word and the meat of the word? Are you wondering when your church is going to get around to serving the ice cream and cheesecake of the word? Does your pastor take this whole Bible thing way too seriously? Well, you need to check out the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience. Everything at the Bible Buffet centers around your comfort and convenience. Everything is gluten-free, trans-fat-free, and truth claim-free. We have the latest, the very latest, in the best kind of spiritual food you can eat. This week's regular Sunday specials include Aryan appetizers, Sabellian succotash, Galatian goulash, Gnostic nut salad, and Pelagian pie. And don't forget, the Bible Buffet is a fully accredited ministry of the Church of Smorgasbordianism. The Bible Buffet, not your father's worship experience. Back to you guys.
And so, Richard, do you want to join us at the Bible Buffet this Sunday?
Yeah, I just wondered why the Galatian goulash was so expensive. I wasn't sure who set the prices of these things. Is it market driven, or what's the deal?
I want you to work hard for that Galatian goulash. So,
well, I'd love to. I'm actually going to my Baptist church light, because we only have 7 commandments and just an 8% tithe. So.
I think Galatian goulash is so expensive because it's the biggest entree that they have.
It must be.
But you're not going to Bedside Baptist to hear Pastor Pillow speak on the 7 Z's?
Yeah, exactly. I actually have a guest speaker. Pastor Sheets is there, I think, guest speaking. Yeah, so he's always really good. I could be in that one for hours on end.
Yeah. So what can we do about I would like to say especially the word faith teaching, but you know what? I think if you did a little survey, you might be surprised how many Christians read their horoscopes,
Exactly.
Every week, every day even. You might be surprised at how many Christians are open to some of the less subtle forms of occultism.
Well, contemplative prayer, centering prayer, et cetera, et cetera. How does that fit in? And how do churches really guard against this? Because we have some pretty big names in the Christian community that seem to be promoting these occult practices.
Well, I think one of the problems is that we have lost the sense of what it is to have a Christian, if I can use this term, maybe a more palatable term to some people, a true view of the nature of reality. Christianity has coasted on solid views about the nature of reality. There's a transcendent God. We're creatures. We're not God. He's the arbiter of morals and standards, not us. A lot of these things are at the bedrock of Western civilization. But now, over the past 30 or 40 years, that's begun to erode with the influence of various multicultural, different religions, different philosophies. So now we can't take this stuff for granted. Now people are growing up in the church, and they're being constantly bombarded by all of these false views of reality. So I think the easy way to say it is we have to help people understand what are some basic truths about the nature of reality that are the context within which I understand my Christian faith. And I think a lot of pastors don't even know how to begin to do that. What would that even mean?
Maybe that would just mean, like, I don't know, this is a way out idea here, but maybe it would mean preaching the Bible.
I do think it is that, but here's the problem though, Ron, because there is a dearth of Bible preaching. But there's also a lot of Bible preaching that goes in the context of bad hermeneutics or
Yes,
a bad worldview in which that Bible preaching is done. So the Word of Faith preachers can get up and talk about have the faith of God out of Mark chapter 11. And they'll take that to mean, well, God has faith. He used faith, which is a force, and that's how God created in Genesis 1. So you use faith. It's a force you can use to create your own reality.
Well, so maybe I should.
And so to them, they're preaching
well, yeah,
the
but
Bible.
maybe I should back up and say the whole Bible. They have their select passages. They're the little pet texts. What about the text where Epaphroditus was sick, and Paul said, we're just so happy he was finally delivered. It would have been sorrow upon sorrow. We thought he was going to die. Well, where's Paul's faith? Where's Paul speaking? I mean, I think if they were to venture beyond their little pet texts, they would have some.
That's right. Their little proof text.
Right.
It's called systematic theology, isn't it? If they did systematic theology, that would go a long way of eradicating some of this heresy.
Okay. How does this verse fit in with that verse?
Here's a question then. Systematic theology means that we're going to be spending time in the pulpit on Sundays teaching line by line, precept by precept. That's kind of a scary thought. But isn't the pastor's job to broaden the market base?
Well, maybe that's what the praise worship pastor's job is, to get a little bit better music in. Well, look, the thing that bothers me, though, is that I think Christians in the past 40, 50 years have been bullied into thinking our only resource is just special revelation, that is the Bible. And we've lost our heritage as Christians of trying to understand general revelation. For example, Romans 1:20 says, the invisible attributes of God are clearly seen through the things that are made. Mm-hmm. Is the invisible attributes of God are clearly seen through careful exegesis. That's why the Dake Study Bible, for example, which was real big, I think a big influence in a lot of Word of Faith, can verse after verse build an argument that God has all these bodily parts. Doesn't it say the eyes of the Lord roam to and fro on the earth? Doesn't it say that God walked in the cool of the day in the Garden of Eden? Doesn't it talk about his arm being strong? So Dake argues, well, God has all of these body parts. The only way to refute that is not just say, well, what about John 4 that says God is spirit? Because he could just say, oh, well, that's a figure of speech. When it describes God as a spirit, it's just a figure of speech. Whereas we would go, well, when it describes God with bodily parts, that's the figure of speech. And I would I
would go to the verse where it says he will cover you with his wings and hide you in his feathers. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. It's like, what do you do with that kind of stuff? Absolutely. Yeah. Even Dake conveniently overlooks that. Or, I'm the bread of life, so is Jesus made out of flour and water? Or I'm the door, does he swing on hinges? I mean, it can get silly, but I do think that it's a solid understanding of what does God say about himself, his nature, and his will through general revelation to the exclusion of special revelation. But I think what happens too much is now Christians are excluding general revelation, and now we've sort of boxed ourselves in a corner, and we find ourselves hard-pressed to defend the Christian worldview in total against some of these heresies who appeal to the very same Bible we appeal to in some instances, like the Word of Faith people do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you know what, we're gonna start our wrap up now because we have run over a little bit. My church does something called the Wonder Lake Bible Institute, and our pastor actually is giving Bible college type teaching every Sunday morning in Sunday school for those who want to come. So he's actually teaching things like contextual understanding, overview of the Old Testament, overview of the New Testament. I would like to see more churches do that kind of a thing on a regular basis. I despair of that ever really happening. So, Richard, it is fun and a pleasure as always. We'll have you back again in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Maybe we could all sing Witchy Woman on the way out tonight.
As long as you're
Age of Aquarius.
Pardon?
I think, who's going to pay the royalty on that? I was going to go with the Age of Aquarius. I really, it's funny how, it seems like we're all now living in the rock musical hair. We are. I mean, let's face it. They talk about, back then they talked about.
Even though we're becoming hairless.
I'm not sure, yeah.
Even though everybody's bald, I mean, people shave their heads nowadays. It's like they talked about being in tribes in that musical. And now that's a very postmodern word for how people, congregate socially. Well, anyways, we need to wrap it up, don't we, Don? Isn't that right?
We do. Yes, we do.
Credit where credit is due. So let's talk about the fine people who have helped us with this program. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Justin Case. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D. Opposer. Our Mormon archives manager is Polly Gummis. Our Liberal Denominations Bureau is headed up by Lucy Goosey. Transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys is Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yoleg Pulling. Our technical assistance comes from Murky Research. Our legal advisors are the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham & Howe. Our grievance resolutions director is Giovanna Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is Wiretapping. Our original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, which are solely responsible for everything you see here, but you will never prove it in court. Okay, back to you guys.
Okay.
So final goodbye.
And with that, Richard, give them one more time your website if they want to go there and get more information.
Yes, richardghowe.com. G as in Glenn, richardghowe.com.
Are you any relation to the Dewey, Cheatham & Howe who
actually, yeah. That's my uncle, I think.
and Howe is Howe.
Howe, exactly.
Okay.
All right, Richard, it's been fun. Ron, we will see you.
Thank you.
Night
Thank
all.
you, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.